Welcome back to another episode of Camp Time is Real Time. I am your host, Sarah Lebrecq, and we are getting very close to camp. It's so wonderful. It's the end of June. It's all happening, you guys. Today, we are lucky to have Ashley Spencer, who was a camper and a counselor from 2003 until 2014. So she was a third session camper, which is a unique perspective. And she rose up through the ranks and eventually was a head counselor in archery. So we had a really good chat about all of the ways that perhaps she should have known her spot as a CIT was probably secured. And it was just really cool hearing about how, she went from in her words, a relatively unknown camper to, being a head counselor. It was great. So this is a really fun episode, and I think you're going to enjoy it. I am getting really, really excited for the start of camp because it is coming, you guys. And I'm assuming you're all listening to this podcast the moment it drops. So not to worry about the timestamp, but that's where we find ourselves. So this is a good one. You're going to enjoy it. Come on the pod. Love to hear from you, especially if you're getting that camp spirit now. It's camptimefcdc@gmail.com. Or give us a follow, camptime_realtime on Instagram and TikTok. All right, for now, here's Ashley. And I texted Katie Crowley and I go, "Did you have Ashley Spencer in your tribe?" And she goes, "I have no idea." And I'm like, I wouldn't, yeah.
She was my very first head counselor. I joined as a Micmac and she was my counselor, but was only ever a third session camper. So I never expected anybody to remember me. And I was only a camper for 3 years. So it's funny. Mike Cowell is one of my very good friends. And he says all the time, he's like, "Oh, remember when?" And I'm like, "Mike, I wasn't there." And so he's called it the like Mandela effect. So he got married this fall. I was invited, but I couldn't go because my cousin was getting married the same day and I was in the wedding, which was devastating to me. I really wanted to be at the Cowell wedding.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But so a couple of us got together for like a Friendsgiving. We did a camp themed Friendsgiving. That was actually fun. And we had to bring like cookout food.
Hold on. Who was at this? Tell me all about it. This is amazing.
Mike Cowell, Lauren Siegel, and Julia Warren and I are still very close. So we're kind of like the four little amigos. And we hadn't, with COVID, like just hadn't seen each other in a long time. And we were trying to think of something to do. So Lauren was like, "Well, I'll host a Friendsgiving." I don't know whose idea it was, but they were like, "Let's make it camp themed." So we were all for it. And we're like, "Yeah, we'll make it cookout themed. Bring your favorite cookout food." So there was chicken nuggets, mozzarella sticks, pigs in a blanket.
Amazing.
There was way too much food for 4 people.
Of course,
but we really got into it. Desserts were provided. There was bug juice. Like we went all out.
Oh my God. That was this year?
That was this year, yeah.
That's amazing.
But yeah, while we were there, they were talking about the wedding and Mike was like, "You were there, Ashley." I'm like, I was not. And he thinks I was there, which I will take as long as he thinks I was there. But I'm like, I was not in attendance. So similarly, there are a lot of camp people who are like, "Oh, remember this?" I'm like, no, I wasn't there.
Yeah, but that's kind of like a testament to the impact you left. Because people assume that you were there, just like, "Oh, she must have been." Like when I think of camp, I think of Ashley. She was there.
I mean, I will always take that, and I take it as a compliment. I'm like, all right, if you think I was there, cool, great. Like I'll roll with it.
Do you remember how you like came to be at camp? Like,
so I guess my mom had like known about FCDC for a while. I'm from Franklin. I honestly grew up like 5 minutes away from camp. I never knew about it.
Yeah.
And so I probably would have been like 10 and the catalog came through and my sister's a year younger than me. We were looking through it. We're like, "This place looks really cool." And my mom's like, "Oh, you want to go there?" Like, I always thought you guys wouldn't be interested. Full disclosure, my grandparents like lived on the beach. So we spent most of our summer at my grandparents in the pool, the beach. So my mom was like, "I just never thought you guys want to do summer camp because we spend all of our time there."
Yeah.
So we signed up for it. I had a couple friends from school who also signed up for it. So there was like 2 or 3 of my girlfriends who did it, um, which made it worthwhile. I think if I just did it alone, like going into it, I don't know if I would have loved it. But the fact that I had other girls there that I knew and we were experiencing it, everything for the first time,
Yeah.
it made it okay.
And anyone we would know?
No,
No. Okay.
no,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely loved camp the most, like even out of my sister.
Yeah.
So I was of my friend group, the only one to apply to be a CIT.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I think, and you went just third session like throughout the whole
Just
time?
third session. And that was kind of the reason. We had other things going on. And my mom was like, yeah, it works. Like pretty much right before school, I'll send you guys off to camp. And then
Yep.
we have a week in between and you're off to school type of deal.
Yeah.
So, you know, I love that we went third session because it's funny. Kyle talked about it in his podcast, but he was saying that as a camper, everyone loves third session. And I'm glad that that was kind of my experience because I feel like I just got, from a camper perspective, like all the big should-do.
Yeah. Well, that was in the peak of like carnival day, right?
Oh,
And
for
that,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Carnival day, like oatmeal was my favorite thing as a camper. Like there was just so much going on. Pizza day was a tie-dye. Oh my God, I loved tie-dye.
Oh, this is
Yeah.
amazing.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the
People,
like arts and craftsy girl in me like absolutely fell in love with tie-dye. So I think there was just so many things that we did in third session that was supposed to be like celebrating the end of the summer type of deal that like isn't done in first and second. Not that there's not other things that get done, but just the things that I really enjoyed were in the third.
yeah, it was like if you're only going to be there for 2 weeks, like it's just like the concentration of things right there. You get pretty much everything. You said you like out of your friend group were like all in, like more so than them, and you applied to be a CIT. Did you like, was there any where you like, oh, I don't know, I'm not a 6-weeker, I might not get it? Like, were you
Oh,
nervous
for
about that?
sure. Like I
Really?
definitely, I mean, I would have been little, obviously, applying, but I definitely remember saying to my mom, like, and even her, she's like, you probably won't get it, but like, might as well try.
Sure.
And I think my family has always had a very realistic output on
Sure.
life.
Yeah.
So knowing that, like, yeah, there's people that go there for 6 weeks. I grew up here, like, nobody knows who I am at this point.
Yeah.
And I got it and I was floored because at the time, you know, I think they said they had like 25 applicants. They only picked 10. So I was so shocked. But honestly, like as a camper, I was always that kid who like picked up after like I was such a goody two shoes in my own life that like
Yeah.
I think I was the pinnacle of like a good camper and therefore like, oh, this will translate to be a CIT.
Yeah.
I was not a problem child by any stretch of the imagination. So I think that was
Yeah.
worthwhile in my CIT years.
Yeah, core attribute, I would say.
Legit.
Yeah. Who were some of the people in your like CIT class?
So it's funny, like going into my first year as a CIT, orientation, everyone's sitting in the tent. And you have to, like the first day you partner up and everyone does introductions. I remember looking around and obviously I recognized heads and stuff from when I was a camper, but I remember looking around and I was like, I don't know anybody my age. So because I like kind of had a weird camp experience where my camp friends were my own friends from real life.
Right.
I didn't like create these relationships as a camper. So I went into it and I was like, I don't know anybody. And God bless whatever head was like this poor CIT and like paired up with me. But Liz Fernandez was my year. Not many people my year stuck around very long. I think I was the only person my year who made it to a head.
How did you, Mike, Lauren, and Julia become like tight?
That's a great question because the three of them, they would have been a year older than me.
Okay.
I wish I knew exactly how, but I think like Julia took me under her wing and her and Mike were really good friends.
Yeah.
And just like kind of growing up through camp, Lauren and Mike were really good friends. And in high school and stuff, I mean, the amount of times we just like be at Mike's house hanging out or like, I don't know, doing all the like shenanigans that you do as a high schooler.
Sure.
Doing absolutely nothing.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, I wish I was like, oh, there was this defining moment where, and I like, could we have been put in a competition together? Or I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe it because so like Katie Crowley, Katie Sorensen, Katie Bell, and I are still very close. And I couldn't pinpoint the moment that we were like, yes, we are all best friends now.
Right.
It's
And
like,
and I don't know how it happened. And it's funny, you like go back through, because this would have, by the time I was a CIT, this was like the start of Facebook, where like everybody needed to like document everything they did. So I literally have like FCDC '07 session 1 albums on Facebook that are now private that like nobody needs to see anymore because they're that embarrassing.
Sure.
But you kind of like go back through and it's like, oh, I was friends with them like even way back then as a CIT, but I don't know how.
So that's really interesting to me because I always wondered in the like the social media era, because you can stay in touch with your camp friends, right? Like after it ends. So like with us, like it would end and all of my friends from camp would be in different towns. And then it would just be like, see you next year.
Right.
That's it. And
and honestly, it was like, this was the time of AIM. So I distinctly remember like in the morning before camp, like messaging all my friends. And, my mom would be like, Ashley, you got to get in the car. We got to go. And it's like, I'm going to see these people in a half hour, but we're still like, what are you doing today? What are you wearing? Like excited for this competition? I don't even know.
Oh, nice.
So AIM was a thing. And then, yeah, everyone just like Facebook friended each other. So you could stay in contact out of season. And it wasn't nearly to the extent we were at camp, but there were a few times where we would kind of do like a bigger outing in like the fall. We were always really good about doing something in the fall and then it like filtered out. But somebody would be like, oh, my parents said everyone could come over, and there'd be like 20 kids in somebody's basement and we'd watch a movie. Or it'd be like somebody's birthday and they, chose to have camp people come instead of like their real high school friends.
Yeah, it's like an either or. Yeah,
exactly.
Not a mixing.
You cannot mix. So, no. Or like a bonfire, like that was really big back in the day. So I think we were really good, like October timeframe, like, oh, miss everybody, school started, let's get together. And then it fell off real fast.
Yeah, that's really cool though. Oh,
yeah.
That makes me like really happy. I hope they're still doing that. Like holding on to camp, like with your claws in the fall, just like.
Exactly. Yeah. And it would just be like your kind of age group. And it very much was like a CIT early assistant thing.
Yeah,
but
sure.
It was nice to have.
Oh, I think that's awesome. So as you get to your first orientation and you're looking around, realizing you don't know anyone, how quickly did it take for you just to be like, it doesn't matter, I'm here. Like, I'm excited to see sessions 1 and 2.
Yeah, I honestly, it probably took me like the whole 6 weeks. I was always more than happy that if somebody asked me to do something, I would do it, but I was never volunteering. I was never putting myself up first. It was more just like, how can I help? Like, I want to be the most helpful. It really wasn't until I probably was assistant age that I finally was like, all right, you have a place here. Like, you know what you're doing. You can be out of the box and be the oddball. And that's always been the great thing about FCDC is it allowed me to kind of break out of my shell a little bit, where other aspects of my life outside of camp, I felt like I was in a box, and you don't have to be in a box at camp, which is great.
In fact, yeah, it's encouraged not to be.
Exactly.
So because you were only a third, not only because you became just the third session, was there anything your first year perhaps that you were like, oh, wow, didn't know this was a thing?
I mean, like so much. I want to say, so the first week there's like, camp always loves to play pranks on new people, and I hope they still do, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not a thing anymore. But so there's a prank that gets played on a new counselor, and the whole camp is in on it except the new counselor. Well, I might as well have been a new counselor because I'd never experienced a session 1 before. And Tom had told me like, hey, you're going to be in this later. And I was like, okay, didn't know what it was. He was just like, there's a competition later and you're going to be in it. I'm like, all right, you're the CIT representative. So there was a CIT, an assistant, and a head. And, the camp is literally around the big tree, like the music's going, everyone's getting excited. And someone's like, oh, this is this competition. And I was like, oh, how do you know that? And I don't remember the conversation verbatim, but they basically were like, oh, it's a prank on the new person. And I was like, it is? And they told me what it was. And I was like, thank God you said something, because I would have participated.
Yeah.
Like, full-blown participation, and obviously would have ruined it because they'd be like, no, this isn't how it works.
Right. Yeah.
So that, or like Herbie, I don't know if Herbie's still a thing, but like, all the CITs get together, and I was like, what are you guys talking about? Like, I have no idea. So those two are two that stick out to me, and I'm sure there's countless others. All the competitions, like,
Right.
I don't know,
Yeah.
the boat race, I feel like that's a session 1 or 2 thing. A lot of the like synchronized swim and karaoke, like those happen earlier. Yeah, it was and that was probably why I was so hesitant to really like jump in feet first at the beginning, because I was just like experiencing everything for the first time.
Yeah. It's kind of that weird, like I've been here for several years, but I'm the only one who doesn't know what's happening. It's like a weird
Right.
spot to be in. Yeah.
It
I can
is. So
appreciate
it's
that.
like I thought I knew everything, and then you're like, oh, you very much don't. So I obviously knew like these are all the, activities we have, and this is how the day goes, and like this is what cookouts look like. But like in terms of what the entire summer looks like, I had no idea.
Yeah. So where did you end up how many years were you ahead?
I was
With
ahead for 3 years, and
where,
I was
what?
archery all 3 years.
Oh, not, ooh, did you get certified?
I did get certified.
Nice. How was that?
So I was excited to tell you this story because I don't know if they still do. I assume they do, but everyone does that like overnight certification at this random camp in Connecticut,
Mhm.
except me. So I got out of it because um, this certification camp runs like 2 different weekends back to back. So let's just say it's the first weekend in June and the second weekend in June. Well, I had a family vacation that was going, like, we were flying out Saturday and coming home
Yep.
Saturday.
Yeah.
And I remember telling Tom, I was like, hey, I have this conflict. And clearly that had never been a thing before.
Right.
So he was like, well, can you change your flight? And I was like 18 years old. I'm like, no.
I don't think
Um,
so. Yeah.
so I think I was in jeopardy of, I mean, obviously you need to be certified. So I think it
Right.
was kind of in jeopardy of like, am I going to have a job? Like, are they going to have to find somebody else? So thankfully, I found a place in Foxborough that did a day-long 12-hour certification course. And I think they did it like a few times a year, and they're happening one before. I mean, like the stars aligned. So
Oh my
I never
gosh.
had to go to the camp, but it's always so funny hearing like Scott or Jack, like former counselors before me, tell these
Yeah.
stories. I'm just like, I never had to go.
Yeah.
I
That's
so
so funny. Wait,
yeah,
did you find it or did Tom
I
find
found
it?
it. I think that was the only way, because I very much was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? And me like trying to solve every problem. I was like,
Right.
I think I posted, again, going back to social media, I think I posted on Facebook being like, does anybody know where I can get certified in archery? And like camp people are like, what are you
What?
doing?
Yeah.
Like somebody's like, I'm pretty sure Gail does that for you. And I was like, no, no, no,
Nope.
it's not happening this year.
Oh my.
Um, and probably if I didn't find that, I probably would have like flown out separately than my family.
Yeah, I know. It's like looking back, it's like, yeah, well, actually, I would have changed my flight. That's
I
fine. Yeah.
probably could have, but at the time I was like, oh my God, I'm in a rock and a hard place. But
Yep.
it worked out.
Well, it feels that way, right? You're
Right.
like, the one thing a year I don't want to miss. And yeah, that's really funny. Wow.
Mhm.
So, how did you like archery?
It's funny at first, like when Tom was like, he said, he called me to tell me I was going to be ahead. And he said, I was fully expecting arts and crafts because Julia Warren was the arts and crafts counselor before. And
Mhm.
I knew she wasn't coming back. So I was
Oh,
like,
okay.
it's me. Like people
Right.
already think we're twins.
Right. Yeah.
And he was like, I have archery or wood lore. And I was like, ooh, this is not how I thought the conversation would go. And I remember being like, well, I do not want to be in the woods all summer.
Right.
I was
Yeah.
like, I guess I'll do archery. And at first I was kind of bummed out about it. More just, it wasn't like, I'm a very crafty person. I very much thought
Yeah.
I was.
What did you give out for bullseyes?
So I was very strict. And if you got, if you got in the, so there's, the middle is yellow, but there's like 2 circles.
Sure.
So I was like, well, there's an inner bullseye and an outer bullseye. So if you got an outer bullseye, I had like those 2 packs of Starburst that I bought, and
Hmm.
you would get one of those. And if you got an inner bullseye, At that time, we had moved on from arrowheads. We had the arrowhead necklaces.
Okay.
So that's what I gave out, but there was still some arrowheads left over.
Mhm.
So there were the 6-week campers who like would get a second bullseye in the summer. So then I had a running list of all the kids who got bullseyes from each tribe. And if they got a second one, then they got the arrowhead. And I think only once or twice I had a kid get a third, and that's when I was like, I don't know what to give you. I think I might have been like, hey Tom, can I have a feather? Like
Right. Yeah.
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 I was like, you're getting a repeat arrowhead of some sort.
Wow. Ooh, I liked it. Well, that's planning right there. That's some effort.
That took some planning. The balloons never worked.
Yeah.
We'd always try to like put a push pin in, and the push pin would fall out, or like the arrow would go, and the wind from the arrow would like cause the balloon to fly away from the arrow. So the kid would be like, it should have popped it. And I'm like, it's physics. I'm sorry. And just the amount of time it took to like blow up balloons. We tried tape, so the balloon, it was a mess. So yeah, we just stuck to the basics.
When you were there, was it still the blue whale, or was it the white?
It was the white. So
okay.
Definitely my first year, and it was still, we put the targets on the hay. Mm-hmm. And then we had a tick problem where there was ticks in the hay, and I think it took me a minute to figure out that like they were in the hay. You know, you go in the woods for tribe time or a cookout or whatever, but I kept finding deer ticks on me. And geez. I couldn't figure out why. And then I was like, I think they're in the hay, because days that I didn't have to go digging for arrows, like we might not have had junior camp. It's always when you have the little ones that you're digging for lost arrows.
Sure.
And it was the days where I wasn't going in the hay that I was like, I'm not getting any ticks. So told Gail as soon as I found out, and the next summer hay was gone, and now they're like rollout targets, which is so much better.
Whoa. Okay. That's you just solved a mystery.
I did.
It is funny because it changes when you like get over the little hill and you don't see the blue whale. It is a little jarring just to be like, oh, something has changed.
Yeah.
All because of you.
It was, I feel like there's a lot of things that like unintentionally were because of me. Right. But, or like I might have brought up and was like, this needs to change. But yeah, so there was like a tick infestation. Mm-hmm. And honestly, the hay was a pain anyways. Like you'd lose arrows. We'd have to, every time it rained, we'd have to cover it up. Right. Sometimes the like targets would get sopping wet, so you'd have to pull out a new one. So then Gail bought these rollaway targets. So at the end of the day, we just rolled them into the shed and we rolled them out in the morning, and there was like zero setup. It was great. That's great.
It's funny. I've definitely been to camp like recently, and I'm still picturing the targets on the hay. Yeah. Like that. Now I'm going to have to double check. That's very cool. Wow.
It was a little more official than.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
I always had rock star assistants though. Like as a head counselor, Tom was very nice to me, and he always gave me a great assistant. I mean, especially like CITs too. It's their first time. Like you don't always get great CITs, and they don't come back as assistants. Right. But I always had rock star assistants who, you know, made my job not a job. Not that camp is ever a job, but sometimes, you know, as a head, you do have to like do more work depending on who your assistant is. And I, you know, I think I had both AJ and Andrew Friday.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I had James Mullaney. I had a lot of guys. Yeah. I had a decent amount. They were all great. And then as an assistant, I don't think there was any activity I didn't do. I never had woodworking, which is interesting. Yeah. Did I ever have theater either? I might not have ever had theater. Those ones, like, I don't have like specific memories of like working at that.
Yeah.
Other than just kind of like going if you were like walking a tribe around or something.
Yeah.
But I pretty much like did the whole gambit. But I always loved like boating. Boating was always fun to like be the counselor of, because I'm like, yeah, I can take the kids out in the boat all day long. That's great. The best. Didn't love doing games because I didn't always want to participate. Nice. But yeah, some great ones. Ceramics was always fun. Yeah, did junior camp a lot. I actually enjoyed doing junior camp. Because you kind of got to like visit all the activities and participate a little bit. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's the new perspective I've gained on junior camp. Everyone being like, no, here's why it's great. You get to
yeah,
do camp. Like, it's pretty good.
exactly. And I mean, like those kids are just so, everything is so magical to them. Um, yeah, and it's fun that you have different experiences, you know, even just like them running around the jungle gym and like, you know,
Yeah.
watching them go down the slide or like pushing them on the tire swing, things like that. You know, just making sure that their camp experience is the absolute best.
Yeah. Well, I still have my kids have their gems that they, you know,
Oh
dug for
yeah,
and like here we are, whatever, 10 months later, and they're like, yeah, still got it, know where it is. So yeah, those the things that happen at camp matter from a very early age. Like
for
even the little
sure.
kids understand. Yeah. You also come from a long line of social directors too.
I don't know what possessed me to do it other than I thought it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember who would have done it before me, but they left and Tom was looking for new social directors. And I think I was at the time, I was probably like a second or third year assistant.
Yeah.
Um, and Julie at the time was like, I think I want to do it. Do you want to do it with me? So we were co-social directors.
Nice.
Which like is a lot of pressure to put on a 15, 16-year-old. I had no business, like I couldn't even drive yet.
Right.
And I'm planning these things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was definitely fun. You learn very quickly that it's a lot of work and some things are just not worth it. Like I learned after a year or two that going out to restaurants with 35 people is
Yeah.
the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Um, so we started thinking of things where pay in advance. And then like we did ice skating one year. We would do bowling and like we'd go to like pins or something. So that way it was like, we're just going to rent out 6 lanes type of
Yeah.
deal and just do those things. And honestly, I think people enjoyed it more. It obviously took a little bit more planning, but it saved me the headache of being like, guys, we need $10 more for tip. And like,
Yep.
you
Yeah.
didn't pay enough.
Yeah.
That aspect was the bane of my existence. And then obviously planning the end of the year party was fun.
Yeah.
And figuring that out.
They are definitely good lessons to learn. Because at that point, I'm assuming you guys were still doing something like once a week, right?
We were, yeah. So
Yeah.
like TCs was always a week 3 thing. When I was doing it, we had stopped going to whatever that buffet was, Imperial
Oh,
Buffet
Imperial Buffet. Yeah.
thing. So like that was no longer a thing. I think we still kept around Eagle Brook because that
Yeah.
felt like a tradition. And at least we were in like a separate room and I felt like we weren't bothering other patrons.
Yeah. Social directors, unsung heroes. Like it's funny because like you're as a kid working at camp, which we all are, you just assume that end of the year party just like makes itself happen.
Occurs.
Yeah. It's like, no, there are two people like probably stressing over a lot of things. It was you and Julia one year. Did you have other partners or was it just
I
you?
did. Alana Vertulo and I did it one
Yeah.
year. Julie and I did it a couple of years, and I probably had another, but I like distinctly one year I think I might have just did it by myself, which is absurd.
Amazing.
But we also were kind of in that time period where we were not allowed to go to the Elks Club for the end of the year party. There was a couple of years where we were like, it just got a little out of hand and we needed to pause the Elks. Yeah. So that was another challenge of like, what do we do? Yeah. So yeah, that was interesting. One year we went to Pins. Another year we went to a different facility, but like didn't have a bar. Like there was no food or drinks or anything like that. And we kind of just like played games and it was a little interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not as fun as the Elks.
Yeah. I mean, what is really?
Even going to I went to the 50th reunion last year and just walking in that building, I was like, this is giving me ultimate flashbacks. It hasn't changed.
It was, I've said it, I think I've said it on the pod too. That was weird. Being back in that space, like at that time of year, I was like, "Whoa, I have not done this in a long, long time."
A long time.
Yeah. But it was great. And then it was like, I was like, oh no, I've been to this exact party so many times and I love it. I was so happy to be there.
It was an easy transition, but like from the door, like the front door to like the entryway to the room was very like, oh, okay. And then I got in that room and I was like, all right, I'm fine.
Yeah.
It was a little weird.
What did you think of the reunion?
I thought it was a lot of fun. I was pleasantly surprised at like how many different eras there were.
Yeah.
And it was a good group of people. I mean, there was people that I haven't talked to in a really long time. That was the one kind of big, I mean, there's a lot of bummers about COVID, but a lot of people I feel like have lost contact with each other because there was really like 3 years where nobody was seeing each other.
Yeah.
So that was nice to kind of get that time back and, see people that I'm like, I haven't seen you in 5 or 6 years. How are you?
Right. Yeah. That I thought it was, I agree. It was like a huge mix of people, and it was fun. It was fun. I had a really good time.
The weirdest thing for me was seeing, the current, because obviously the current staff was there, and some of them I had no idea who they were, but some of them would come up to me and be like, do you remember me? I was a camper. And I was like, and you're a head counselor now? Like that was mind-boggling to me. But then I was like, well, you have been out of camp for like 9 or 10 years at this point. So that's what time does. But
they keep
that
growing.
Was wild.
Who were some of those kids?
So I had all of the Pansiaco kids as campers through various, whether I was like an assistant, or I think I definitely had Elizabeth when I was a head. So
what tribe did you have?
It changed every year. So I had the Chippewas one year. I don't know why. They like never kept me. I think the Comanches my first year. Then I had the Chippewas because I was like, am I going to get I thought I was going to get the same kids, but it was like whatever the reverse is.
Yeah.
And then I got jumped up to the Mohicans. Tom was like, I thought it would be fun if you had an older tribe, but I was like, I don't know what to do with these kids.
Right.
Like, and that was kind of fun. I knew that was going to be my last year. That like, was my last year of school. And I was like, I'm going to need a real job next year.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun because those kids were just so chill. And I'd be like, what do you guys want to do today? And sometimes they were totally cool entertaining themselves. We'd go for like walks in the woods. I didn't have to like necessarily plan stuff with them. We're obviously with the Comanches, it was very like, we need to play this game for this amount of time.
Right.
But yeah, it was a nice break because even like growing up, like I taught dance for a long time. Like that was my first job out of college. So I'd always worked with younger kids. So it was kind of nice to work with these like 10, 11-year-olds, and we would just vibe.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's funny. You think of them now and you're like, oh, you're 11. But in camp, you're like, oh, these kids are so old. It's so easy.
Right. Literally just vibing. Like,
yeah. That is a nice break. So wow, good for you knowing that it was going to be your last year and following through. I had trouble letting go.
I definitely walked into that, and I wasn't ruling it out, but I approached it like, this is probably the end, because at this time next year, I would have graduated college. And it was one of those things that I was like, if I know it's good for me, I should like actually get a job right out of college instead of waiting a summer.
Do it one more. Yeah.
One more. 2004 would have been my last year at camp. So I forget what age, that going into 7th grade, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
So I'd been a camper for 2 years. My sister was a grade younger than me. And so I was a Micmac, a Choctaw, and then I was a Mohican. I was never an explorer.
Okay.
So going into my explorer year, there's obviously, at that time, there was only one tribe for the oldest kids. And I think like as kids got older, they got less interested in camp and kind of phased out.
Yeah.
That's clearly not the case anymore, because now we have 2 older tribes.
Yep.
Or they're not tribes anymore, but groups.
Troops.
So my mom went to sign us up, and there was a spot for my sister, but the Explorers was full. And again, I was only a 3rd session camper. So like, these are kids that are going the full 6 weeks.
Right. Sure.
And so I think my mom was like, is there anything you can do? And Gail felt bad. So she was like, well, I don't want your younger daughter to go and your older daughter not to be able to. And we're only a year apart. So she was like, well, let me think of something and I'll call you back. So either later that day or the following day, she calls my mom and she's like, what if I make an all-girl group of multiple ages? Would your older daughter be okay with that? And I was like, yeah, I don't care. Like, they're a grade below me.
Get me in. Yeah.
Right. So It was me and my like 2 or 3 friends from school, and literally everybody else was my sister's age. It was like Kat Nutting and Jen Friday and Alana. Like it was that group.
Yeah.
And then a few randos,
That
aka me. So I mean, I'm forever thankful for that, because obviously, had she not done that, I wouldn't have had another 8 years of camp experience. Like it just wouldn't have been an option.
Oh, and what you didn't know at the time was the fact that Gail did that for you. You didn't even have to worry about your CIT application. Like looking back, honestly, you know what I
That's
mean?
true.
Like she was probably like, everyone tells me this is a great camper. We want to have her back. And they literally made a tribe just for you.
I mean, it genuinely was, let's say it was a tribe of 12.
Yeah.
There would have been 9 6th graders and 3 7th graders in it. And it was me and my 2 friends.
Yeah.
So that was fun. But I always heard stories like as I got older, they were like, oh, that all girl tribe. And I'm like,
who made that? Yeah.
I mean,
No, that's nuts. So because those guys, Kat and Jen and Alana and those guys, those were my first Navajos. And that tribe was awesome. Like it was like head to tail, like amazing. And so you were in good hands. That's great.
yeah. So I mean, it was a fun time, but I just remember, I don't know, I was always that camper that like Kyle was talking about it in his podcast, where he was like, oh, I didn't necessarily go like full throttle into camp mode. I kind of had to get some sense knocked into me. And not that I wasn't full throttle, but I just don't think I was the average camper that like got super excited about everything. Like I was the one who, coming from the pool, changed out of my bathing suit. And I remember Kyle was an assistant and he was like, why do you, like, it takes you so long to get out of the pool? Why? I'm like, because I don't want to be in a wet bathing suit all day.
Right.
Like, so I was that, or like I would be brushing my hair, like walking down the hill.
Yeah.
Which could fly because we didn't have a bunch of boys being like, oh, come on, let's go. You're like holding us up. It was just a bunch of girls. So we took our time,
Yeah.
making sure our hair was brushed out coming out of the pool before we went to adventure. So I think that's what it was. We were kind of known for like always being late after the bell, or just like being mildly high maintenance. But it was
That's great. So you mentioned you had like a dance background. Were you then like psyched about like skits and stuff? Were you like choreographing stuff?
No, I very much flew my like performance background under the radar. People who really knew me knew I did that, but
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want this to get out because I don't want to do this at camp.
Whoa.
I know. So that's where I always like, I kind of like fell under the radar a little bit. I was always like apt to give it my all, but not quite that much. So I think the only time I ever had to do a performance was Tom knew I was a dancer. And he was like, Ashley, this year's the year you got to do it. He'd say that every year. Finally, he's like, you got to do it. And I think ultimately what made him kind of force me to encourage me to do it was there was another girl who was also a dancer who had become a counselor. So he was like, you two got to do it together. And I was like, all right, well, I can't get out of this one.
Right. Yeah.
So I ended up, we choreographed like a really goofy dance to like something from the Nutcracker. I was like, this is going to be purely entertaining. Like, I'm not going to try to make it look good.
Yeah.
So me and the other counselor kind of did a little serious part at the beginning. And then I had 2 boy counselors. I think it was Sam Wolpart and James Mullaney, like jump out of the theater when like the music starts to get exciting, and like had them just improv. And it was hysterical and it was perfect for camp, but I was like, all right, check. I did it.
Yeah.
Done.
That's all the dancing I have.
That's all the dancing I have to do.
But that's like, though, I mean, when you say you like kind of like kept a little in the tank, like a little close to the vest, like, I don't know. It's like Tom kind of knows that, right? He's like, it's okay because we need that piece at camp. Like, it's okay not to be like going 100 miles an hour. We need someone to take the rest to reality.
Honestly, you can't have every counselor be giving 150%.
Right.
And not that like I'm not giving 150%, but you
in
need
the same
people,
way.
Right. You need the people who are going to be the center of attention all the time, but you need the people who are in the background setting up the competitions, or like that was always me. So I wasn't necessarily in the limelight, but I feel like I set up, once I was ahead, I feel like I set up every competition at that point. He'd pull me out of archery and be like, Ash, I need you, from like up the hill.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
so that very much was my role. Or like, I don't know, something happened to a kid, I was the first one to kind of like pull him aside and be like, no, it's okay. So
Yeah.
that was kind of where I shone
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
more than like getting
Yeah.
up at sing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know it is really interesting because I was definitely thinking, I was like, oh, if she was a dancer, she must have been up doing the skits and up at singing and stuff. But you're like, no, I'm just going to be the responsible adult in the room. We need one.
There's got to be one.
Yeah. So you had as your counselors, you had Katie as a Micmac. Who were your Choctaw and Mohican counselors?
Scott Howe was Choctaw.
Awesome.
And Mohican was Courtney.
Oh my gosh. Woo! That's
Yeah.
amazing. What a
I really
run.
had some all-star counselors.
Yeah.
And then the funny thing was, this couldn't have been planned, but it feels like it was. My first assignment as a first-year CIT was ceramics with Courtney. And I was like right back where I started.
Yeah, could have been planned.
It
Could have
probably
been.
was planned.
Well, you know what? Don't feel like silly for questioning it. I got placed with like my favorite counselor of all time, like as my first CIT. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky. What a coincidence. And only recently I was like, wait a second. Hold on a
That
second.
really wasn't a coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. But it's kind of like you're familiar with Courtney, and they like want to set you up for success, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was a good thing because I knew her fairly well because she was my head counselor before then. So I felt like she probably was the one who told me like, no, bananas is like, don't do it.
Yeah.
I probably was her, but she was the one I felt like I could confide in without feeling embarrassed by being like, I don't actually know what's going on. Where like some people be like, what? You don't know what's going on? What do you mean? Didn't you grow up here? I'd be like, no, I didn't. So that was really beneficial for me.
Do you have any John Panciaco stories? Did you?
Oh man,
you must have worked with him.
I definitely did. There was one year I was an assistant and he made me do, which he always made any girl assistant he had do, the grocery shopping for cookout.
Nice.
And that
which apparently started when he was like in high school. Like Kelly would do his stuff for him. And so it's a tradition. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. So I must have been like 15. I think I was a first year assistant. So I could not drive. And I like came home and I'm like, hey mom, I have to do the cookout shopping. So like my mother, trying to be the best mom she is like, all right, well, you have to buy all this food for, 15 people, counselors included. We're going to BJ's. Oh. And so I had no idea what my budget was. Right. I bought way too much food, way too much food. So I remember coming back and I think I was like, John, I spent $40. And he was like, what? Which is like basically the entire cookout budget. I think somebody else was doing the dessert. I was literally just getting whatever the entree was. Let's say it was like chicken fingers.
Right.
And I probably bought like 7 bags of chicken fingers from BJ's because I just didn't know any better. So that's not like specifically a John Panciaco story. It was more just me very quickly understanding the ins and outs of cookout shopping from John Panciaco.
That's funny.
But yeah, I mean, I just remember like he made everything so it could be the dumbest thing in the world, and he just made it like so interesting. And he was just a great guy to talk to. I always really loved being his assistant, or even just like being around him as a head. He'd be like, hey Ashley, like how are you? And it wasn't just a like I'm doing small talk because we're like in each other's vicinities. Like he actually wanted to know what was going on in my life, what I was doing, which I think when you're in your teens and early 20s is always really appreciated to be like, here's this actual adult who cares about what I'm doing. But just all around great guy, the absolute epitome of camp. Well, and his time at camp was just so like spanned such a long period of time that like everybody has a story. So I wish I had like one other than like my lame cookout story. I wish I had like one story that I could like pinpoint, but I think that's almost what makes it even better is like he just always was awesome. So I like can't differentiate between the awesomeness.
Yeah. I think that is really well said, because I'm in the same boat. Like pick one. I'm like, oh, it's just the way he talked to you. the way you felt talking to him, like what he brought to every situation, just like, it's just everything.
Yeah, it
So
was a constant. I think camp always felt like a home to me in the sense that I mentioned it before. I could just be 100% my authentic self, where like being a dancer and being a performer, you're always trying to meet somebody else's standard. And like there are no standards at camp. It was just like
right.
whatever you want is good enough. It's actually better.
Yeah.
So I think that was something that really I needed growing up, and I needed in those like formative years, even in high school and stuff where you're so impressionable. It was nice to be able to be like, I can be myself, whoever I want to be. No one's going to care. And I've just never in my life experienced such a like close knit community where you really have people from different walks of life, but it does not matter. You truly, it's like a time machine. Anytime something gets brought up, you're like instantly sucked back.
Yeah.
But it's enjoyable. It's not like someone brings up something like, I don't know, from high school and you're like, oh God, are we really going to talk about that? Like, are we really
Right.
going back there? But you know, with camp people, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that. And you get so excited.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just the Kool-Aid. I don't know what it is, but
Even just getting a little taste of it, like listening to someone talk about their experience at camp. And then if you were there for those years, people are just happy to hear about it, just talk about it, because you can kind of relive that. To your point, those 6 weeks where it's like, it just doesn't matter. Like we're all
it
in it
doesn't.
together. Yeah.
And everybody could bring something different to the table, and that's what made it better. And
Yeah.
I mean, every day was something different, even though like, yes, at its core, like camp is, the same, it's the same activities, but every day was better. We were always trying to be better. What can we do differently? And um, everyone's so innovative and creative and just excited.
Yeah.
It's hard to replicate in real life.
Yeah, I know. It's such a bummer that it is, but because like if you could bottle it and just take it with you, oh boy, what a world we'd be living in, right?
I know.
So you've been out for 10 years and you still have, three really good camp friends. I think that is a testament to your time there too, right? That you
For
can
sure.
kind of
And there's definitely others that, stay friendly with, but
yeah,
those are my people. Like when people are
yeah,
like, "Oh, do you have any childhood friends?" Like I think they mean that like your neighbor or somebody you went to school with. I'm like, "Oh no, I have my camp friends."
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so that's always, they'll be we're do or die. There's been weddings and houses bought and, everything in between. But it's, very like fairy tale that we kind of like are going through all these life changes together.
yeah.
And it started at FCDC. There was one time, and this is kind of like the epitome of like what your um like legacy at camp is. So it
Mhm,
was a couple of years after I stopped working at camp. I want to say like 4 years later.
mhm.
And I was at the 45 in Medway with my mom just eating lunch. And our waitress towards the end of it was like, "You look really familiar." And she didn't necessarily look familiar to me. And she goes, "Did you ever work at FCDC?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And she was like, "Archery, I remember you." And like her
Oh,
face instantly lit up.
yeah.
And so she's like, "Oh my God, archery, I remember you. I was a camper." And I don't think she was a camper of mine per se, like in my tribe, but she was just a FCDC camper while, I was a head counselor.
Mhm.
And I think even in that moment, my mom was like, "Oh, like people, like you really make an impact on people." And it was cute. Tom used to call me, I don't know why, he used to call me the queen of archery. And he'd be like, "Queenie." And I by no means was the queen of archery. Like I could barely hit the target myself.
Sure.
I could teach, I could not do.
Sure.
Um, but when I got my food to go, she wrote Queen of Archery on my box instead of my
Oh,
name. It
that's
was really cute.
that's awesome. And that like, yeah, you just personified it. Like that's it. And like you probably made her day. Like
Yeah.
just like I can't believe I'm seeing my counselors like out
And
in the
she was
wild.
probably like 18, maybe. Like she maybe even a little younger than that. So I guess like it had been a while for, if she's like working at a restaurant as a server, she's
Right.
obviously, in high school, not a camper for a long time. And I'm like, okay, the fact that you're going back like 5, 6, 7 years. So that was really cool.